You're about to watch an interview I shot with Dr. Joe Henrich at the Religion and Science Colloquium at Boston University. It was hosted by the Center for Mind and Culture, which is a nonprofit research center that focuses on complex social problems, including but not limited to religion and cognitive science. My friend and colleague Dr. Connor Wood invited me to interview the participants, so this is the first of several interviews from that one conference. Joe Henrich and I talk about his research on war and religion, but we also get into the topic of credibility-enhancing displays near the end of the interview. This is the tendency for humans to believe something more if they see their peers or authority figures acting as if that belief is true. So without further ado, here's Joe Henrich. Welcome. So I'm here with Dr. Joe Henrich. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Joe Henrich. I'm a professor of human evolutionary biology at Harvard University.
Human evolutionary biology. That's so cool. So recently, you and some of your colleagues published an article. It was an article, I think, on does war increase religiosity?
That's right.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because that sounds so provocative. Does war increase religiosity?
Yeah, so we suspected that war might increase religiosity because there's been a number of studies showing, for example, that earthquakes will make people more religious, where in New Zealand, in Christchurch, there was an earthquake and they had before and after measures, which showed that people got more religious after the earthquake. So we thought maybe war shocks might act similarly. So we found existing survey data from 3 countries, so Tajikistan, Uganda, and Sierra Leone. And we're able, because of the way violence and the wars in these countries occurred, we could infer that the people's experience of violence might have been effectively random. So it's as if you think about this in the context of a medical experiment, people are randomly assigned to treatment groups. One treatment gets the medicine, the other doesn't. And so if you see an effect in the treatment group, you know that the medicine worked. Well, we can think about that as war. So if people are getting randomly shocked with war because they happen to get shot or someone in their family happens to get shot because a village is attacked or because someone drops bombs from high above, then we can look at war to see if war then affects your downstream behavior. And in particular, in this case, it's religion. So we looked at people's attendance at rituals and whether they joined religious groups. And what we found in all 3 places was that the experience of war led people to be more religious. And this not only continued for over 10 years after the conflict, but actually got a bit stronger as in the places where the conflict was further back in history.
So let's speak to that, what you just said, further back in history. Which sites had the longest prolonged war, and how did that interact with your data?
Yeah, so in Tajikistan was the place where the civil war had occurred furthest in the past. So they were 14 years after the conflict, and that's where we see the biggest effects. And we have, in our sample, we have both Christians and Muslims, and so we see the effects roughly equally sized in both groups. In Sierra Leone, we have both, and we can see it in both groups there as well as in the other sites.
Yeah, so let's talk about the religious communities then. So you had Uganda, which was like 97% Christian or something like that from your data set?
Yes.
High 90s, and same with Tajikistan, but it was high 90s Muslim population. So did you see similarities in population's response to war, even though we're talking cross-religion too, Muslim Christianity?
Yeah, so it's hard to say too much about the effect size except in Sierra Leone where we have a bit of both. And there it looks like roughly similar effects on Christians and Muslims. So it could be, humans have a basic response to shocks in which they kind of grip more tightly to social norms or they become more social. But we actually are able to show that this effect on religion is over and above this willingness to join social groups. So it's true that the war also made people more likely to be social and join social groups. But the religion effect seems to be over and above that. So it's kind of a mixture of the two together.
And in terms for Sierra Leone, where you have a mixed population, 60-30 Christian Muslim, I'm actually not sure what the division is. Was the war sectarian in nature, like between like interreligious violence, or?
Well, it wasn't Christians against Muslims or anything like that. There was this Lord's Religious Front that was entering the country and fomented this civil war. So that's one of the things in selecting these different populations. We wanted to look for places that weren't sectarian conflicts, weren't ethnically biased conflicts, because of this effort to try to find a natural experiment where we could, first make the kind of inference that the violence might be randomly assigned. People might get, just by bad luck, get violence. And also where we could then check it with data to see if people did seem to be randomly assigned based on the available data that we have. And so in these different sites, that basically holds across these places.
So my thoughts are going in two different directions here, both historical, so backward in time, and also forward in time. Did you take a historical look on this, somehow extrapolating wars from the past and then comparing it with data that we would somehow measure religiosity, whether it's early 20th century with World War I or medieval period in Europe with wars? Is there a method where we can extrapolate this for historical study?
Well, I don't think anybody's tried that. We did also analyze the effects of World War II, and we find similar effects there, although we didn't use that case because we couldn't defend the natural experiment part of it. So it didn't seem to pass that this was a natural experiment where we could argue that people were randomly assigned to these violence, nonviolence. So we maybe cautiously say that it might also hold for World War II. It'd be interesting to think about, look at something like cathedral building or something related to participation in the Crusades. So there might be ways to get historical data and make inferences.
All right. So the other direction then, so, today we have conflicts going on. The Syrian civil war has obviously been one of the more major conflicts of the 21st century. We have sectarian violence throughout the world. What are the next steps for this study? Do you see this being applied for other war zones?
Yeah, I mean, we think that, we have populations now. This data comes from dozens of villages in these three countries. So there's some reason to suspect it will generalize. It seems to fit with the data on earthquakes and other kinds of shocks that also comes from around the world. So we should expect it to occur in these other places. The thing is, there it'll be harder to disentangle, because if you do have religiously motivated conflicts, the religion is part of the conflict, so it's hard to know if it's just the shock or it's the religious nature of the conflict that's driving the effect. Now, one thing that's interesting to think about is I think there's other evidence to suggest that religions make people more cooperative, make them bond better as a group, lead to greater solidarity. So one possibility is that there have been historical feedbacks where religion led to a group, say, spreading, widely diffusing, and then the experience of war made them more religious. And so you can imagine you get some kind of feedback loop there.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I see this all the time in the comments on this YouTube channel, people saying, oh, religion causes war. So this is kind of not necessarily contradicting that, but it shows that there's another step. And you call this step an actual feedback loop.
Yeah. So, there could be various ways in which religion causes warfare. One would be that it makes people more religious, more cooperative, more parochial, more tightly bound as a group. And then that group is able to force its will, or it believes it'll be more successful in conflict with other groups.
So another aspect of your research that I've been very interested in is this concept of credibility enhancing displays. Could you speak more to that?
Yeah. So I guess about 10 or 15 years ago, I got interested in how so if you think about this from an evolutionary perspective, we can think about natural selection shaping our minds to make us better cultural learners. So you can see this in some obvious ways in the way the youngest children and babies learn. They tend to pay attention to people who are more successful or more competent or more reliable. So from a young age, kids are cluing in on this. But when we heavily rely on learning from others, it opens up the possibility of exploitation. So somebody could pass us bad information, say about what to eat. They could tell us we should eat something that they don't want to eat, so that there's more of the food for them, for example. So the idea was that learners might evolve a kind of immune system to this. And one way to make them immune is they'll only learn from people who, when they try to pass on a belief to them, which is going to involve costly behavior, that the person themselves engages in the costly behavior, so that they see someone demonstrate that they actually believe in it. And I called this a credibility enhancing display, or cred. Now, this seems to be a basic feature of human learning that applies to all kinds of things like food choice. So children are much more persuaded to eat foods if the adult just tells them this is nutritious and really good for you and will build your body. That's not very persuasive. But if they see the adult eating it, then that's much more persuasive, and they're more likely to then also take on the beliefs. So then this then has big implications, though, because it can be harnessed by religions. So if your religion requires, say, religious leaders, priests, whatever the relevant category is, to engage in costly displays, this could be food taboos, vows of poverty, sacrifice, walking on hot coals. So there's a whole wide array of these things that you see across the world in different religions. That makes them a more effective transmitter. Because when you see someone engage in one of these costly things like celibacy, that doesn't seem like something someone would do unless they really believe the underlying supernatural beliefs. And this is, of course, one reason why hypocrisy can be very undermining. So if someone was supposedly celibate or supposedly fasting, and you see them sneaking crackers or something, then your faith in them as a source of valuable transmitted information goes down.
So cred has currency whether you're in the family dynamic. So it could be a mechanism to explain how children seem to always be, religious identity seems to run in families. So that's one explanation there. And it also can be an explanatory explanation for religious communities as well. So the credibility enhancing display of a religious leader, a charismatic holy man of some sort.
Yeah, there's an anthropologist named Rick Sosis. And Rick did a study of European communes in the 19th century. And he looked at how long the communes lasted and whether they were religious and how many costly requirements they had. So did they impose taboos on members? Did members have to make donations? Did they have to give up stuff? And what he found was that the religious groups that had the more costly requirements endured longer. So they actually survived longer as groups. And so this means groups that adopt a certain set of costly displays are actually able to galvanize belief in the group and make the group more enduring. Interestingly, the non-religious groups hardly endured at all. So there was something powerful about religion that helped build the groups and keep them together.
So let's circle back to what we started with, the discussion about war increasing religiosity. Have you seen any bit of this credibility enhancing display at work in this research?
Well, in our particular data set, we don't have anything like that other than that people are attending rituals. So just seeing people attend rituals can be a kind of credibility enhancing display. So, for example, one of the things that predicts later belief in God in people is not whether their parents believed in God, but whether their parents had them attend rituals and do costly things. So you can imagine you're seeing yourself and also this larger community all doing these costly things, attending rituals, donating money, helping poor people, things like that, that then cause people to induce deeper beliefs that they then carry into adulthood. So that's one of the ways in which ritual actually provides credibility enhancing displays to kids, which have longer downstream effect. There's lots of ways in which things like suicide bombing or terrorism can act as a credibility enhancing display. You see someone do that, it means at least that person deeply believed in it. So, if you look at the role of martyrdom in religions, Jesus or the early Christian martyrs martyr themselves and they're willing to die for their beliefs. That's persuasive to a learner that this person really believed in heaven or whatever they were preaching.
So martyrdom essentially being the ultimate
credibility
the ultimate enhancing display.
It's
the ultimate cred. Interesting. Great. Well, I think that's all I got. Thank you so much for joining me.
Sure. Okay.